Hello, this is Lucy O'Hagan from Wild Awake, and this morning I'm going to show you how to build a fire. So fire, like, what an incredible thing, and I think sometimes we forget about how much everything in our lives depends on fire, from flicking the switch on the kettle to your lights to your car. Such a key element in our lives. And what an incredible thing it must have been for our ancestors to discover fire. And yeah, it's like we don't really know how they first came upon fire. It was most likely lightning strikes or solar fires, and they would have carried the fire from place to place. So even after learning how to start fires, from banging rocks like iron pyrites together or rubbing sticks together, when you understand the amount of energy that it takes to start a new fire using these methods, it makes sense that we would never have let the fire go out. So we would have found ways to carry the fire from place to place. And you would have been in big trouble if you let the fire go out. I imagine you wouldn't have been very popular. Yeah, we're going to explore two methods of fire lighting today. So one which is a bit more modern, so a fire steel, and another one which going into the Iron Age, using flint, so a type of rock, and steel, or iron. So beginning, it's really important that if you're lighting a fire, that you start to think of some things around, like, do you have permission to light a fire? So I'm definitely not saying that anybody should go and light a fire in a park, because you'll probably get chucked out. And also, yeah, we don't have so much of a culture. Like, it's amazing up in Scandinavia, and even in Scotland actually, with the right to roam, you'll come upon places where there are set fires and people really respect them and keep the place clean, and we're just not there yet. Or we were there, we're not there now, and hopefully we can get back there again. So yeah, make sure that you have permission. And if you do have permission, then you need to think about, like, where are you lighting your fire? So looking at the ecology of the place, like, where are you going to do the least amount of damage? So thinking about, like, where the trees are. You know, you don't want to be lighting your fire right up against a tree. I see that very often, where people curl into the tree and use it as a kind of shelter. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you're not even on any roots, because the fire, it can travel along the roots, but it can also just really damage the tree. So it's a big no-no. Yeah, also the ground that you're lighting on. So any peaty ground, the fire can actually, I've seen this happen, it burns right down through the peat, and it can travel for miles and pop up somewhere else. So not in peaty areas. And also on the, these kind of spruce, pine, any kind of conifer woodlands, those needles are really full of oil, which makes them amazing medicine and great for teas and things, but not good for fire, because that oil is obviously very flammable. So basically, if you go into most culture woodlands, they're going to be sitka spruce, and it's not a great idea to light fires in there, because they can travel and spread and create wildfires, which are really amazing and used by people across the world, as a way of managing the land. But here, it's just gonna kill loads of wildlife. So yeah, looking at the ground, so this is a broadleaf, deciduous woodland, so it's really fine to light a fire here. And also, yeah, just having a look, are there any really low-hanging branches that are going to catch your fire? Are there, we're in nesting season at the moment, are you going to disturb any nesting birds? It's important to think about these things. And it just kind of brings you into that mentality of yeah, the kind of ritual act that you're about to do. So you, a real kind of slowing down with all of these things. You know, we're not mindlessly pulling up plants, or yeah, with the tracking, just jumping to a conclusion. You're really just slowing down and observing and taking your place in the web, essentially. I'm also thinking about where the wind's coming from, so I want the wind to be on my back. So yeah, obviously you don't want the fire blowing towards you as you're trying to light it. So let's get to it. So one of the main things with fire lighting is preparedness. So you don't want to have finally got your ember made, especially if you were using a kind of friction method, and then you're frantically struggling to find things to keep the fire going. You want everything ready around you. This should be like quite a relaxing thing to do. So I have everything prepared. So I'm going to talk you through that from the ground up, essentially. So we're going to use, I'll show you both methods, but we're going to use sparks. So that's important because you want something to catch the spark. So this would be different if you were using like a lighter or a match, because you could put it straight to your tinder, which would light your sticks. But because we're starting with these tiny little sparks, essentially we want something tiny for those sparks to jump onto, and then something else to help that grow into a bigger ember, which is then going to ignite it with our breath and with the wind. So we want to start with something nice and tiny. So we're going to start with Tinder, which is not just a dating app. Before, it was this thing which helped to ignite those sparks. So I suppose that's why they chose the name. So we're going to use essentially anything. Oh no, we're going to start with this. So we're going to use, today I'm going to use some mushrooms. So there are lots of mushrooms which can be used as tinder. So one of those is something called King Alfred's cake or coal cakes. So you can have a look at them there. So we find these growing predominantly on dead ash, and they're just kind of stuck onto the trunk like that. You can sort of see where the branch would have been. In botanical name for these is Duldinia concentrica, because of all these little concentric circles. So yeah, these are really great for catching that spark. And another great mushroom is this one here. So we don't find this as often in Ireland. So this is Fomes fomentarius, which is tinder fungus. But we do find one more common in Ireland is Ganoderma, artist's conch fungus, and you can use that in a similar way. It's not the traditionally used one, but it still works because what it has, oh look at all the spores coming off, cool. It has a layer of velvet just underneath this cuticle layer. There's some nice ASMR for you. Underneath this cuticle layer, there's a layer of velvet, which looks like this. I didn't process this one, but then we have like the trauma layer. So we want to take out the layer underneath this. So people do this by carving off, first by boiling it in wood ash, and that helps to like separate, and it's easier to carve. So we carve off the cuticle layer. You can see I've just started right there. And then you could carve out the middle layer until you're left with like this kind of block of what is called amadou. It's a really hard thing to do. It takes a long time. But amadou is an incredible material. So famously, it's known for Uisneach the Iceman used this fungus. So Uisneach the Iceman was a prehistoric caveman who was found in the Swiss Alps. It was a couple of hikers who just came upon his body and thought, it was maybe a body from a hiker a few weeks ago or recently, but it turned out that he was from 30,000 years ago, I think, and perfectly preserved. Incredible. So on his belt he had lots of different things, like all of his clothes were preserved, and you can look into this because it just has it's like a real window into what our ancestors were using. So he had some birch polypore fungus on his belt, which is a polypore fungus that grows on birch trees. And it's used for all sorts of amazing things, but one thing that it does is it helps to treat intestinal worms, and it turns out when they did the autopsy that Uisneach did in fact have intestinal worms. So like, as if we needed like to know those people had been there and living so close to the land for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So yeah, our ancestors were not these kind of primitive beings. So Amadou is also really great as a fire starter. So he also had Amadou on his belt as well as this polypore medicine. So we're going to use that to catch the spark today. So those are kind of like our initial tinders, what are going to catch the spark from these methods here. But then we have this little glowing ember and we need to grow that. So to grow that, we're going to add something that's fluffy and dry. So if you've ever gone past like a river or a lake and you've seen those plants that look like big sausages on sticks, so they deserve like a whole day to themselves. So many uses for this plant called cattail, Typha latifolia, commonly called bulrushes, but this is actually not the correct name for them, but who cares? They're sausages on sticks, and they have this amazing downy fluff which comes off those sausages when they're dried. So you can go up and it's just, I wish I had one to show you because it's like this incredible like example of like just sacred geometry in nature. Like they're so perfectly tucked in that when you open it they all kind of fly out. And I used to keep one in my, the glove compartment in my car, and anytime somebody would open it, it would just turn the car into a snow globe, which was fun. So yeah, anything fluffy and dry that you find in nature will make good tinder. So here I've got some poplar seeds, they're really fluffy. Willow seeds will do the same. Like you could use dandelions, but you would need quite a lot of them. Play around. A lot of these things, I think, is finding the quality that you're looking for and playing with it, rather than saying you need to find this wood or this plant or this. Like, obviously learn which ones are not good to use, like in terms of if they could be a danger to you, but just play around with all of this. It's about, that's what our ancestors did, you know. So we have our fluffy thing, and that's going to grow our little ember. It's called a coal extender. And then we want like the bread. Somebody said to me that this is like the meat, the cheese and the bread. So the bread in this case is, I wonder if you recognize it. It has these little balls. So this is called cleavers or goosegrass or robin run the hedge, sticky weeds, sticky willies. So at the moment the new spring growth of those is coming up, which make it amazing juice, really great for your lymphatic system. But the old growth from last year is still climbing up the hedges and it's stuck there and it's dried. So it makes amazing, like it makes an amazing nest for your tinder to go into. And this is also tinder. But what's great about it is it sticks to itself. So when you make your nest, you'll pull this down off the hedges. Do watch out for any nesting birds, like both as a way of respect, but also I found like amazing little clutches of eggs and nests just rummaging through the hedgerows for this stuff. So you want to make a nest and you don't want to make it too tight, but you also don't want to make it too loose. So the idea is that there's enough oxygen getting in to feed the little coal, and it's not being suffocated, but also that it's not too loose that it's just going to fall apart and that the flame isn't going to have enough to grab onto to grow itself. So if you can, I don't know if you can even conceptualize how tight that is, but I put my thumbs in there and I make like a little kind of, like where I might put my eggs. And I always keep a little bit down here just to hold on to. So I'm going to be holding this like that and using my thumbs to feed in the tinder. So into that, I'm going to put my cattail fluff. There we go. And then I'm going to leave that aside and just show you what else I have prepared here. So once we get this lit, we're obviously going to need to start building our fire. And if you've maybe figured out until now, we started with this tiny little spark. That tiny little spark is jumping onto our tiny little fluff, which is growing bigger and catching on to our bigger cleavers or dried grass or hay or clematis bark, or lots of inner barks from trees work well. So we're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then we're going to move on to like our sticks. I always like to start with some dried stalks from plants. So these are dried nettle stalks, which again are still out from last year. But anything, again, play around. If you find something that's dry, hollow, makes this sound, it's going to be good. And these are really fibrous as well, which is what makes them great for cordage and great for fire lighting. So I'll have my nettles, and then I have, ideally I would like these to be a little bit thinner, but I think because I have the nettles, it's okay that they're a little bit bigger. But we kind of go spaghetti size sticks, pencil size, thumb size, and then just build up from there. So to start, I have this fire pit that we use. We come down and have some picnics here and fish. So I'm gonna set these in. So this is like my little raft. So what this is gonna do is just lift up my fire from the ground. So putting more oxygen into the fire. Fire loves oxygen, and it loves fuel, and it loves some kind of heat source. It also loves height. So we talk about the fire pyramid. So those 3 core components, but it also needs that height so that we don't suffocate the fire and that it has enough room to grow. So I'm gonna use the fire steel here. So I'm gonna put my amadou just on the edge of my flint, and I'm gonna use the striker to hit down in this motion. You see the sparks coming off, and I want one of the sparks to land onto my amadou. So this normally takes a little bit of time. And if we don't get it on this go, then I'll just use the fire steel, because otherwise our video will go on for a very long time. Okay, let's use the fire steel. Anyway, you can see both being used. Maybe I'll show you with this as well. So this is the coal cake again, so I want to make it a little bit So amadou is also used as a fabric, which you can probably see from this. And there's a great guy called Paul Stamets, a mycologist, and yeah, look him up, he's great. He talks a lot about amadou as a fabric, and it's made a lot in Eastern Europe, but it catches a spark so easily. Can you imagine our ancestors having one of these mushrooms? And what I've done on Stone Age projects before is just to put a spark into this, and it just smoulders along for the day, so you can carry it with you. So you can see how amazing that is. I'm going to let that one burn, and I'm going to use the amadou and pop that into my nest. And we're going to tuck it in right in there. And we're just going to start very gently blowing. So if you see sparks flying, you're blowing too hard. So once it starts to smoke, you can just really go for it. Whenever I do this in classes, people always think I'm in the middle of some kind of ceremony, which I guess I am, but it's also because it just keeps putting wind through when you're taking a breath in. to add in some birch bark, and I'm going to set on my nettles. I'm remembering to keep that height. Let them get caught. Then we can add in our smaller twigs. And begin to set on our little pencil-sized ones. And you could have this already set up actually. Like you could have made it kind of teepee structure and then just set your little tinder nest in. Oh, the wind's changed direction. Hello, fire. And then you can start to add in your bigger sticks after that. So, Sinead, that's how you build a fire. Thanks for watching.